Have you ever wondered, where did Cain find his wife? The question lingers like a shadow at the edge of Eden, unsettling, persistent, and strangely absent from most Sunday sermons. Cain, the firstborn of Adam and Eve, the tiller of the ground, the one whose hands first stained the earth with blood. He is marked, exiled, cursed, and yet he becomes a husband and a father. The Bible tells us this almost in passing, without pause or explanation. No name, no lineage, no clues about the woman who bore his child. And yet she matters. She matters because she opens a door not just to a missing chapter, but to an entire forgotten world. A world teeming with life in the shadow of the first sin. A world filled with daughters of Adam and Eve. Daughters unnamed, unnumbered, unseen, yet indispensable. They lived, they bore children, they passed down language and prayer and memory and whispers by firelight. This is not just Cain's story. This is the story of those forgotten, of women lost to time, of a God who marks but does not abandon, and of a question that dares to defy the silence. Welcome to Verse and Wisdom. This isn't just a Bible story. This is your inner journey. What you're about to hear is drawn from Genesis, particularly chapters 4 and 5, but also from ancient traditions, the Book of Jubilees, Jewish oral law, and echoes scattered through Apocrypha. It is reverent, yet inquisitive, scriptural, yet searching. We do not come to distort, but to illuminate, to slow down, to feel the weight of each word, to trace the outline of those lost in the margins. And it begins with one haunting question. Who was Cain's wife? But to understand her, we must understand the man she married. Cain, not just the murderer, not just the exile, but the son, the firstborn, the one raised in the shadow of paradise lost. Imagine growing up in the lingering warmth of Eden's gate, hearing stories of the garden your parents once walked with God, and knowing it was your birth that came after the fall. Cain was the first to plant seed in cursed ground, the first to sweat and bleed for food that once came freely. He was the first to taste the ache of rejection, not from man, but from the holy. His offering from the soil, from his labor, was not accepted. His brother's was. And in that moment, sin crouched at the door. God warned him. Why are you angry? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But Cain turned away. He lured Abel into a field, and there the ground drank blood for the first time. What followed was not just punishment, it was displacement, exile, identity torn in half, and yet God did not destroy him. God marked him, protected him, a symbol, a scar, a mystery. The mark of Cain. This is where our journey begins, not in certainty, but in ache. Not with answers, but with questions that pull us deeper into the sacred text. Let us return to the edge of the garden, to the place east of Eden where silence becomes story and the forgotten are remembered. But before we begin, pause for a moment. Imagine the wind stirring the leaves outside Eden where the cherubim still stand guard with flaming swords. Imagine the dusk and the first city being built by trembling hands. Imagine a woman nameless, exiled with her husband, bearing life in a world stained by death. She walked into the pages of history and disappeared. Who was she? And why did God allow her story to be forgotten? Cain wandered. The earth, once fertile under Abel's care, now turned to thorns beneath his steps. He had no home, no altar, no brother. He became, as Genesis tells us, a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. And yet somewhere along that road, someone took his hand. Somewhere he built a city. Somewhere he lay beside a woman, and from them came a child named Enoch. But how? From where, with whom? These are not just historical curiosities. They are echoes of our own longing to belong, to be forgiven, to start again. Cain's story is not only a tragedy, it is a mirror. He bore a mark, but he also bore a future. A future through a woman whose name we do not know, but whose presence reshaped history. And now we step into that silence. We walk with Cain, and we search for her. Let the story begin. To search for her, the wife of Cain, we must search the silences of Scripture. And we must do so with reverence, knowing that the Bible is never careless. If something is hidden, there is purpose in the hiding. Genesis 4:17 states plainly, Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. It is the first mention of marriage after the fall. But who was she? The text offers no name, no parentage, no origin. In the Hebrew tradition, that silence is not an absence, it is an invitation to listen to what is not said. Some scholars believe she was a daughter of Adam and Eve, one of many unnamed children born during their centuries-long life. Genesis 5:4 tells us, "After he begot Seth, the days of Adam were 800 years, and he had sons and daughters." That one quiet verse, opens the possibility that the world was not so empty as we imagine. That Eve, the mother of all living, birthed not 2, not 3, but perhaps dozens, even hundreds of children. But why would the Bible leave them unnamed? Because this is not a book of biology. It is not a family tree. It is a sacred narrative, selective, purposeful. It focuses on the line through which redemption will one day come. And so it traces not everyone, but the ones chosen to bear the covenant forward. Still we wonder. We ache to know more. Who were these women? What did they see? What did they suffer? The Book of Jubilees, an ancient Jewish text revered by the early church and still preserved in Ethiopian scripture, gives us names. It says Cain's wife was Awan, the sister of Abel, and that Seth's wife was Azurah, his sister as well. These names, though not canonical, echo with the possibility of memory. Perhaps they were spoken by mothers and grandmothers, carried in oral tradition until time scattered them into the wind. Awan, Azurah. Their names sound like water and wind. Soft, sacred, almost lost. Imagine Awan, the sister of the murdered, the wife of the murderer, living each day between grief and loyalty, between sorrow and love. How did she look at Cain's face, knowing what he had done? How did she speak her brother's name without trembling? And how did she carry life, Enoch, into a world that had already tasted death? There is a strange grace here. A woman walks forward bearing the child of a man cursed by God, and through that child, Cain builds a city. There is meaning in that. There is hope. But this hope was not easy, for Cain did not return to Eden. He went east into Nod, a land of wandering. The Hebrew word Nod comes from the root to wander, a place defined by its very instability. There Cain began again, with her, with the forgotten woman. The city he built, he named for his son Enoch. The name means dedicated, initiated. It speaks of a beginning, a renewal, a turning forward from blood into building, from exile into foundation. Cain, who had no resting place, created one, and it began with a woman. Who was she? Not just his wife, not just Awan. She was the first to carry redemption through a broken man, the first to choose creation over despair, the first mother after the first murder. And her silence speaks. It speaks of courage. It speaks of grace. It speaks of the forgotten who shape history. Now ask yourself, in the stories we tell, who else have we forgotten? What did Awan feel when Cain first approached her after the exile? Was it fear? Pity? Did love grow slowly in silence, or was it obligation? A burden she bore for the sake of the family. The race, the command to be fruitful. No text tells us, and so we imagine. She knew both Abel's laughter and Cain's rage. She had seen their faces as children wrestling beneath the fig trees. She had held both their hands, and now one was buried and one wandered. And still she walked with him. In that act alone, there is a kind of sanctity, a choice made not from comfort, but from something older than convenience, something deeper than custom, perhaps from compassion. And Cain, what did he feel watching her eyes? Did he search for judgment or mercy? When their child was born, did he tremble? Did he see in the infant's face the hope of reconciliation or the fear of repetition? These are the cracks in the ancient stone where our humanity seeps in. These are the questions that keep the story alive. Enoch, the child of the cursed man and the silent woman. His name carved into the foundation of the first city. A city born from blood and mercy, and from her, mother who is never named again. She has gone from the page but not from the path. For without her there would be no city, no seed, no story. Let us remember her not in doctrine, but in dignity. She is the beginning of all that came next. Now let us return to Adam and Eve, the first to mourn and the first to hope again. Let the next chapter begin. The garden was behind them. The sword of fire turned, and the gate was closed. Adam and Eve no longer walked with God in the cool of the day. They walked instead through thorns and silence, carrying grief in their bones. One son was dead, the other was exiled. And yet life went on. How does a mother mourn when both her sons are lost? One to death, one to shame. How does a father kneel until the ground, knowing it drank the blood of his child? These are not questions the text answers directly, but they are questions the soul cannot help but ask. Genesis does not linger in this sorrow. It tells us that Adam lived 930 years, that he had more sons and daughters, but we must not rush past the pain, because it is there in the ache of these first parents that the human condition takes root. Imagine Eve. She once named the animals. She once stood radiant in Eden. She once cradled the first child ever born. And now she buries one son and watches another vanish into exile. What dreams did she bury with Abel? What prayers did she whisper for Cain? Jewish tradition holds that Eve fasted and wept for Cain every day, that she never ceased calling his name even into the darkness. She believed somehow he might return. And Adam, the scriptures are silent about his sorrow. But silence does not mean absence. It means wait. It means the kind of grief that has no language. A father who names the beasts of the field and now cannot name the ache in his chest. But even in sorrow, the story does not end. Genesis 4:25 says, "And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For God," she said, "has appointed me another seed instead of Abel whom Cain slew." Another seed, not a replacement, not a forgetting, a seed. This is the language of beginnings, of planting again in cursed soil, of choosing life after loss. Seth was not just a son. He was a sign, a symbol that the line of hope would continue, that even after exile, even after murder, even after Eden, God was not finished. And Seth would grow, and he would marry Azurah, his sister. And from them, a new generation would rise, a generation that would call on the name of the Lord. This moment matters, because it marks a shift. Cain's line builds, innovates, creates cities' music tools, but Seth's line, they pray, they reach upward, they seek the face of God. And it all begins with Adam and Eve choosing to love again, choosing to bring forth life even when their hearts were broken. There is a wordless holiness in that choice. To love again after loss, to trust again after betrayal, to bring a child into a world already scarred. That is where the line of promise begins, not in power, but in quiet faith. This was not just biology, it was theology. It was a gesture toward eternity. When Eve called Seth another seed, she spoke prophetically. She used the same word God had spoken in Eden. "I will put enmity between your seed and her seed." In Seth, she heard the echo of that promise, that one day through the woman's seed, evil would be crushed. She did not know how. She did not know when. But in naming Seth, she believed. This is the unseen spine of the Genesis story. That faith begins not with Abraham, but with Eve. That trust in redemption was not a later doctrine, but a mother's cry in the dust. And Seth, what did he know of this wait? What stories did Adam tell him as they watched the stars? Did he speak of the garden of the serpent, of the flaming sword? Did he weep when he spoke of Abel? Did his voice tremble when he spoke of Cain? And did Seth ever look eastward and wonder? Perhaps he did. And perhaps that's why his children, the children of his union with Azura, began to do what no one else had yet done. They began to call on the name of the Lord. In Hebrew, this phrase means more than prayer. It means public invocation, a recentering of human life around divine presence. It was the birth of worship. This is the true legacy of Adam and Eve, not just the line of blood, but the line of faith. From their grief came prayer. From their sorrow came worship. And from their brokenness, God would one day bring healing. So now we stand at a crossroads between two lines. One builds cities, one builds altars. One is born of wandering, the other of returning. In the next part, we walk these two paths and discover what it means to bear a name in the line of Seth. Let's continue. Two lines, two legacies, two directions. From the dust of Eden, humanity began to divide. Not by nation, not by skin, but by heart, by hunger, by what each line chose to seek. Cain's line moved outward, eastward, away from the garden, away from the presence. They built, they named, they multiplied. In the city of Enoch, the city Cain built for his son, we see the first echoes of civilization, the first roots of culture, the first taste of control. It was a city of craft, of music and metal, of tents and tools. Lamech, Cain's descendant, boasted of violence. He took 2 wives. He sang songs of vengeance. Progress had begun, but not peace. Meanwhile, Seth's line moved inward, downward, into the soil of worship. His son Enoch, a name meaning mortal, frail, was the first to lead humanity in calling upon the name of the Lord. And so the stage is set. One line carves names into stone. The other breathes them upward in prayer. One builds cities to protect itself from fear. The other lifts altars to surrender to God. This is not just a genealogy. It is a spiritual map of paths diverging of hearts choosing. Genesis 4 and 5 give us these lists, names upon names. But within those names is rhythm, a rhythm of rebellion and a rhythm of return. Let's walk the line of Cain first. We meet Enoch, not the one who walked with God, but the son of Cain. From him comes Irad, then Mehujael, then Methushael, then Lamech. Lamech is a mirror of Cain, but darker. He does not mourn his killing, he celebrates it. I have slain a man for wounding me, he boasts a young man for striking me. And then he twists God's mercy toward Cain into a shield for his own pride. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold. Violence has now become culture. Not shameful but artistic, sung in poems, danced in cities. Vengeance is not just survival, it is identity. But there is another story, a quieter one, the line of Seth. From Seth comes Enosh, from Enosh Kenan, then Mahalalel, then Jared, then Enoch. And here in this second Enoch, the story pauses. Enoch walked with God, and he was no more, for God took him. In a world beginning to decay, one man returns to the intimacy of Eden. He walks not toward exile, but toward presence. His life becomes a prayer. His footsteps echo Adam's before the fall. Enoch is not famous for building. He is remembered for walking with God. And God took him. Lamech is the first to break the pattern of monogamy. The text tells us he had 2 wives, Ada and Zillah. And from these unions came the first inventors. Jabal, the father of those who dwell in tents and herd livestock. Jubal, the father of music, the harp and flute. Tubal-Cain, the forger of bronze and iron tools. This family gave us innovation. They gave us beauty, structure, advancement. But what was missing? No mention of God. No altar. No cry for mercy. Their world was full of sound, but empty of prayer. This is not condemnation. It is warning. A civilization can flourish outwardly while withering within. And Lamech, singing of blood and boasting of wrath, is a man who has inherited Cain's exile and multiplied it. Cain feared being killed. Lamech celebrates killing. Cain was marked by God's mercy. Lamech mocks that mercy, turning it into a license for violence. Now turn your gaze to the other Enoch, the seventh from Adam through Seth. His story is almost silent, just a few words, but they thunder with meaning. Enoch walked with God, not ran ahead, not fell behind. He walked, a daily rhythm of communion, a gentle pace of trust, a life aligned with heaven, step by step. And then he was no more. The text doesn't say he died. It says God took him. In a world where death reigned, one man broke the pattern, not by strength, not by invention, but by intimacy. The line of Seth whispers to us a different definition of greatness. It is not in cities. It is not in weapons. It is not in songs of vengeance. It is in the quiet walk with God. A walk that can turn a mortal life into an eternal echo. So now we stand between two legacies. Cain's full of noise, tools, power, but drifting from Eden. And Seth's marked by weakness, worship, and a walk that leads home. In the next segment, we will enter the generation of Methuselah and the prophecy that begins to tremble beneath the flood. Let's continue. But pause here. Have you ever wondered what it means to walk with God in a world that's forgetting Him? What does it look like to live a holy life when every city echoes with pride and every song is a hymn to self? The names come quickly now, generations passing like shadows at twilight. Each son bearing the weight of mortality. Each father watching the days stretch and crumble like dry leaves. And then Methuselah, a name that trembles with time. He lived longer than any man recorded, 969 years. But his story is not about longevity. It is about the countdown. Because hidden in his name is a prophecy. His death shall bring. That's what the scholars say it means. His death shall bring. But what? Judgment. Change. A flood. The ancient rabbis believed that Methuselah was a living clock, a breath held between heaven and the deep. And when he died, something would break open. His son was Lamech. Lamech named his own son Noah, a name that means rest, comfort. And in his naming we glimpse a hope. This one, he says, will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord has cursed. From the seed of Eve to the prayers of Seth to the walk of Enoch, now comes a whisper of rescue. A man is born, a man named Rest, but the world around him is growing darker, more corrupt, more violent, more proud. The line of Cain is flourishing cities, shining tools, gleaming arts, blooming. But the heart of man is turning inward, away from Eden, away from God. And so heaven watches and waits, because something is coming, and Methuselah's name still stands like a breath before the storm. What did Enoch see when he looked into his son's eyes? What did Methuselah feel, knowing his very lifespan marked the time? And why? Why would God count so patiently for so long? The answers wait in the rain. Let's go further. Imagine Methuselah as a child listening to his father Enoch speak not only of God, but with him. What kind of questions did he ask? What kind of fears stirred in him as he grew, knowing that his life bore meaning deeper than survival? Perhaps every illness, every fever brought trembling, not for himself but for the world. Perhaps each sunrise was both gift and warning. And then Noah, the child of prophecy, the one born when hope was thin as mist. Noah grew under the shadow of two fathers, Lamech, who grieved, and Methuselah, who waited. And both of them in their own way watched the world rot. Scripture tells us that as man multiplied on the face of the earth, wickedness multiplied faster. The thoughts of men's hearts were only evil continually. But not everyone bowed to the dark. Some still remembered the name of the Lord. Some still lit fires, still whispered prayers, still watched the sky. Were they many or only a few? Perhaps only one. But that was enough. Because sometimes all God needs to preserve a future is one trembling soul who still listens. And somewhere deep in the soil of chaos, the ark begins to form, not yet in wood, not yet in blueprint, but in purpose. And all of it waits. Waits for a final breath. Waits for a raindrop. Waits for a door to open and a world to change. What would you do if your name meant, when you die, judgment comes? How would you live? How would you pray? How would you say goodbye? The answers drift through time as we draw nearer to the rising storm. Rain was not yet known. The earth drank from within, a mist rising from the ground, feeding the trees, the rivers, the roots. The sky held its waters in reserve, as if waiting for a word. And then God spoke. The end of all flesh has come before me. These were not the words of sudden wrath. They were the words of long patience reaching its limit. For centuries, the divine heart had watched the earth grow loud with cruelty. Violence filled every street. Greed poisoned every field. Man's imagination, that sacred gift once used to name and create, now turned toward corruption day and night. And so God grieved. Yes, God grieved. The one who made stars from breath, who shaped man from dust, now sorrowed over his own creation. It's one of the most mysterious verses in Scripture. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. God grieving. Not because he failed, but because love always suffers when it sees what could have been. But in the middle of that grief, one name stands alone. Noah. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Not because he was perfect, not because he was mighty, but because he walked with God. The text repeats what it said of Enoch. Noah walked, step by step, day by day, against the tide. He was a righteous man in his generation, a generation bent on self-destruction. And to this man, God gave a task that would sound like madness. Build an ark. Not a shrine, not a temple, a boat. In the middle of dry land. In a world that had never seen rain. It must have seemed absurd. Neighbors laughed, strangers stared. Even family may have questioned. But Noah obeyed. Without blueprint, without forecast, without applause. He built. Each hammer strike was a prayer, each plank an act of faith. And as the ark grew, so did the silence. Because prophecy was no longer a whisper. It had become wood. But still the skies held back. Still Methuselah lived. And still the people danced. They gave in marriage. They built, sang, traded, ruled. Until the day. Until the sky. Until the rain. But not yet. The ark became more than wood and pitch. It became a line in the sand. A monument to obedience. A protest against the age. Every beam cried out. This world is not forever. Every peg whispered. Something is coming. And yet, no thunder sounded. No voice from heaven. Just the slow work of days. Noah rose with the sun, gathered wood-shaped timber, and taught his sons to build. They were not priests. They were not warriors. They were carpenters of prophecy. And while they worked, others laughed. What is this flood? Where is your rain? What God tells a man to build a ship in the middle of the land. But Noah didn't answer with words. He answered with action. Faith. The book of Hebrews tells us is the evidence of things not seen. And so Noah built what no eye had seen to prepare for what no heart could imagine. And as the ark took shape, creation began to stir. Birds took flight in strange patterns. Wolves howled at skies that still held back their tears. Something ancient was awakening. And the man who built in silence was not alone. Heaven watched. And time waited. Because judgment never comes without mercy first. And mercy always makes room. One door, one ark, one hope. Still open for now, but for how long? The answer draws near. There is a silence that is heavier than thunder. The ark stood finished, massive, unmoving. A monument of faith built not on predictions but on trust. Its wood bore no inscription. Its frame held no magic. But the door was still open. And then something strange began to happen. The animals came, not with chaos, not with fear, but with order. Pairs, sevens. Moving through dusk and dawn, they approached the ark, not as beasts, but as messengers. Wolves beside lambs, lions beside deer, birds wheeling above in strange sacred spirals. Noah did not chase them. He did not coax or call. He simply opened the gate, and they came. Why? How did they know? Even the skies were holding their breath. No human hand trained them. No law compelled them. Yet something deeper, older moved them toward the door. And all the while, the people watched. They watched and laughed. They mocked the builder and ignored the sign. It had become routine now, this great wooden shape on the horizon. The strange man and his quiet sons, the rumors, the warnings, the years, the silence. To most, it had become a joke, but to heaven, it was a clock, a countdown. Each hoofbeat, each wing flap was 1 second closer. Yet still the door remained open. Because God is patient. Because mercy lingers longer than we deserve. Because even as justice gathers, love still waits. What would you do if you saw the animals walk by? Would you follow? Would you wonder? Or would you scoff one more day? Somewhere behind the clouds, the flood was already forming. But before it came, the door remained. One final chance, one final call. And then a sound, not of water, not yet, but of wood. The door, closing, not by Noah's hand, by God's. Because grace also has a boundary, and once it closes, it seals. Who was left outside? And what did they think when the skies finally broke? We're about to find out. The day the door closed, the sky was still blue. Children played, markets opened, music drifted from windows carved by men who never prayed. Perhaps someone joked, "Where's the storm, Noah?" Perhaps someone else, just for a moment, felt a chill and turned away. There's a terrible calm before judgment. Because God does not strike in haste. He waits. Not for anger, but for hearts to turn. But they didn't. They never did. And so the great door, shaped by Noah's hands, sealed by heaven's will, came to rest in silence. Inside, the righteous, the obedient, the appointed. Outside, the many, the unaware, the unconcerned. Even as clouds thickened at the edges of the horizon, the people sang. Even as birds disappeared from the trees, they danced. Even as the ground began to darken with something more than mist, they denied. Because when hearts grow hard, even miracles become mundane. It had never rained, not like this. No thunder rolled. No trumpet sounded. Just a droplet, then another. Soft, almost tender. Until the ground began to bleed water. From above, from below. From places they never imagined. And only then did someone run. Only then did someone scream. Only then did they remember the ark. But the door, it was sealed. Not by wood, not by man, by the very breath that once made them. Too late. Not because God was cruel, but because mercy had waited and no one came. So the flood began not with fury, but with silence broken. And the ark began to rise. Lifted not by hand, but by heartbreak. And still it floated. Because even judgment can carry grace, if you are inside. The rain falls still in stories we tell to remember. Let's remember together. The flood did not come all at once. It began in whispers in the ground, in the sky, in the veins of creation. Springs that had slumbered for centuries suddenly shattered. The sky, once gentle, became a furnace of falling. It was not just rain, it was rupture. The waters came from above, but also from beneath a great unsealing of the deep. The same deep that once obeyed in Genesis 1 when God divided the waters, now returned in rebellion. This was uncreation. What God had separated now collapsed. What he had named now drowned. The days of order gave way to nights of chaos. And still the ark rose. Not swiftly, not with speed, but steadily cradled by judgment, carried by promise. Inside it was dark. Wood and animals, sweat and silence. Prayers whispered into damp shadows. Noah did not steer. He was not a captain. He was a passenger. Because salvation is not something we drive. It is something we enter and trust. Outside, the world screamed. Trees fell. Cities cracked. Men climbed to higher ground only to find water waiting. And still the rains came. 40 days, 40 nights. 40 is the number of testing, of transformation. Moses fasted 40 days. Israel wandered 40 years. Jesus was tempted 40 days in the wilderness. And now the earth itself endured 40 days of divine undoing. Perhaps Noah wept. Perhaps he held his wife, his sons, and said nothing. What can be said when all you've known is being washed away? But still the ark held. It groaned, it creaked, but it held. Because what God seals no storm can shatter. Inside that floating cradle, life endured. Hope endured. And above the storm, unseen and unspeaking God watched. Because even in judgment, he never looked away. In the next moment, the world will be gone. But what will remain begins to float. Let's go there. What was it like inside the ark? The sound of rain never ceased. It tapped the roof like relentless fingers. It wept down the seams of wood. It became a second heartbeat, one that reminded everyone of what they had escaped and what they could not forget. Noah sat perhaps with his head bowed, not in fear, in awe. To witness the undoing of a world is not a triumph. It is a grief too deep for words. He may have remembered Eden not because he saw it, but because the stories of Adam still lingered. The garden, the walk, the exile. Now a second exile, not from a garden, but from a world. Every scream outside, every silence inside, every drifting body, every memory of laughter turned to echoes swallowed by waves. And yet something pulsed beneath the sorrow. Survival, grace, not deserved, not demanded, but given. Noah was not perfect, but he was present. He was inside. And that made all the difference. Because God never said the ark would be comfortable. He only said it would save. Outside, mountains vanished. Kings drowned. The strong, the clever, the proud, all equal now underwater. All human glory is light as dust when the deep rises. But within the ark, breath continued. Heartbeat endured. Covenant waited. And when the rains at last ceased and the waters stood like sky upon sky, the ark floated. Above death, above wrath, above everything that once seemed so permanent. Let us drift with it to what comes next. The waters stood still, like a sea of glass stretched across the world. No mountain pierced it, no tree rose above it. Only the ark, a dot of wood on an endless canvas of judgment. Inside time slowed. Days bled into nights and nights into silence. Noah did not know when it would end. He only knew it had begun, and so he waited. 150 days the waters held their height, not rising, not falling, just wait, just waiting. And in that silence, something shifted. The storm was gone, but the world was not yet restored. The ark drifted. It touched no anchor. It followed no chart. It simply hovered above a world baptized in sorrow. Then a sound, not from the sky, from the earth. The deep began to retreat. Fountains closed, rain ceased, and slowly, so slowly, the waters began to lower. On the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest. Not on a beach, not on a plain, on a mountain, Ararat. High, remote, unreached by man's hand. It was not a place of landing. It was a place of waiting, because the door remained closed. And still Noah waited. He sent a raven, then a dove. The dove returned empty. Again he waited. Then the dove returned with a branch, a single olive leaf. And in that fragile, green-soaked and small hope returned. Life was beneath the surface. New life, the kind only possible through death. God had not abandoned the earth. He had cleansed it. He had carved a new beginning from flood and faith. But the ark was still shut, until one final word. Then the door opened. Light poured in. Earth returned beneath their feet. And the first breath of the new world tasted like rain, mercy, and promise. Can you imagine stepping out into silence? No crowd, no echo of voices. Just wind, just water-stained stone, just the ghosts of a world no longer here. Noah stepped onto earth not as a survivor, but as a second Adam, called to be fruitful, to multiply, to begin again. But he knew what the first Adam had forgotten. That blessing must be anchored in obedience. So the first thing he did was build an altar. Not a house, not a wall, an altar. And there, with trembling hands, he offered to the Lord a sacrifice not to earn favor, but to honor mercy. And God saw, and God smelled, and God spoke. Never again. Not because man deserved peace, but because God desired covenant. He placed a bow in the clouds, not a weapon pointed downward, but upward toward himself. A reminder that wrath would not always win, that judgment would always make room for grace. And from that moment, the rainbow has arched over every storm, even ours. Because we too live after the flood. We walk on borrowed ground, but we walk beneath promise. The story is not over. It never was. Let's step forward. The earth was quiet, not dead, not barren, but quiet, as if the soil itself was listening, waiting to see what man would become after judgment. The sky bore a new covenant, the rainbow stretched like a vow between heaven and earth. It was not a reward, it was a restraint. God promising himself, not man, that never again would he flood the world. But what would man do with mercy? Noah planted a vineyard. It seems simple. Gentle, a return to cultivation. But the first act of soil touching becomes the first stumble. Wine, drunkenness, shame. Even in a new world, the old heart remains. One son sees. Two sons cover. A curse is spoken. And suddenly, Eden echoes again. Nakedness, blame, division. The story did not restart. It resumed. Because judgment cleanses, but only grace transforms. And still God does not turn away. He blesses Noah's sons. He reaffirms the call to fill the earth. Nations begin to form, tongues, tribes, territories. But man as ever grows restless. He was told to scatter. Instead he gathers. He was told to multiply across the earth. Instead he builds a tower to reach the heavens. Babel. A monument to pride, a staircase of defiance. But God does not destroy the tower. He confuses the language. He divides the one voice into many, not as punishment, as protection, because unity without truth is dangerous. Because a single voice aimed at heaven in arrogance is more deadly than 1,000 whispers of worship. And so the nations scatter. The tower remains unfinished. Man forgets the rainbow again. But not God. He watches. He waits. And in one of those scattered tribes, he finds a man. An old man with no son, no future, no claim. His name is Abram. Let's go to him. It's a difficult moment to accept that the man who built the ark also lay exposed in a tent. But Scripture never hides the flaw to preserve the truth. Noah, once the preacher of righteousness, became the subject of shame. And Ham, his son, did not turn away. He mocked. He exposed. He looked and left the image of his father uncovered. But Shem and Japheth walked backward, with cloth, with reverence. They honored what sin had unmade. And for that, they were blessed. From Shem would come a line, a people, a promise. But from Ham would come Canaan, a name that would echo through wars and walls. Still, the story was not finished. Because even as man scattered, even as towers crumbled, God's eye moved. He was not searching for greatness. He was not seeking strength. He was looking for one heart, one soul willing to walk again, like Enoch. like Noah. And so he found Abram. In Ur of the Chaldees, a land of idols, of moon gods, of ancient pride. Abram had no altar, no temple, no sun, but he had ears. And when the voice called, he listened. Go. No map, no destination. Just go. And with that word, the next great chapter of redemption begins. From flood to family, from wrath to promise. Let us take the first step. He was 75 years old. Too old to begin, too empty to hope, too rooted to leave. But when the voice said, go, Abram rose. He left land, lineage behind, and walked into a promise he could not see. Not a palace, not a title, just a vow. I will bless you. I will make your name great. I will make you a nation, and through you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. These were not small words. They were stars inside a desert soul. And Abram believed, not perfectly, not without falter, but truly. Faith, Scripture says, was credited to him as righteousness. Because faith is not the absence of doubt. It is the presence of movement despite it. And so Abram moved. Across plains, over hills, through famine. He pitched tents where others built walls. He raised altars where others raised weapons. And wherever he went, he called on the name of the Lord. But promise is never without pain. Years passed. The skies changed. The bones aged. Still no son. How can a nation come from a man with no heir? Even Sarai laughed, not out of joy, but weariness. And still the voice returned. Look at the stars. Can you count them? So shall your offspring be. It made no sense. It made no difference. But it made something new. Hope in the impossible. And from that moment, the covenant deepened. God would not only bless, he would bind himself. He would walk alone between the pieces of sacrifice, as if to say, if I fail to keep this promise, may I be torn like these. The eternal God making himself breakable. For one man, for all mankind. This is the God of Abraham. Let us walk further. But still no child. Time sharpened its silence. Even as Abram prospered with servants' cattle silver, his tent remained empty of laughter. Sarai watched her own hope wither. She had heard the promise too, but she lived it through absence. Each moon that passed another reminder. Perhaps that's why she suggested Hagar. Not out of rebellion, out of ache, a surrogate hope. Ishmael was born, but he was not the heir. God saw the boy. God blessed him. But the covenant would pass through another, through one not yet conceived. And again the voice came, this time with new names. Abram became Abraham, father of many. Sarai became Sarah, princess, because names matter. Names carry destiny. And then a visitor, 3 men, 3 faces, 3 shadows of glory. Under the oaks of Mamre, Abraham prepared bread and heard the laugh. Sarah in the tent laughed at the idea. A child. Now, is anything too hard for the Lord? The question hung like sunlight, and the womb once closed began to stir, not by medicine, not by will, but by the word, the same word that made the stars, now making a child. And when Isaac came, whose name means laughter, it was joy reborn, not just for Sarah, for all of us. Because from one old man, one barren woman, one impossible promise came a nation. And from that nation, a blessing for all. But the story is not yet easy. Let us continue. Isaac was joy. But joy tested becomes trust. And trust must walk into fire. One day God called Abraham, not to travel, not to wait, but to give. Take your son, he said, your only son whom you love, and offer him to me. Not because God desired death, but because faith once born must be proven. And so Abraham rose, early, not with debate, not with delay. He split wood. He took Isaac. He walked. 3 days, each step a question unspoken. each mile a heartbeat of dread. And Isaac, the boy of laughter, asked, "Father, where is the lamb?" And Abraham replied, "God will provide," not as a riddle, as a prophecy. They climbed Moriah. They built the altar. They laid the wood. And then the silence. Abraham tied his son, raised the knife. And in that moment, the same voice that once called him from Ur now called again. "Stop!" And there caught in the thicket a ram, provided, substituted, the lamb for the son. This is the first shadow of a greater story, of another father, of another son, of a sacrifice that would not be stopped. But here Isaac lives, and Abraham names the place Yahweh. Yireh, the Lord will provide. It became a name not just for a place, but for a people. Because provision is not just about supply, it's about seeing. God sees. God provides. Not just in abundance, but in anguish. Not just when we ask, but when we walk without knowing. Isaac lived, but Abraham had already died. To himself, to his control. And from that death, a new kind of faith arose. One that could birth nations and prepare the world for the promise yet to come. Let's follow it. Did Isaac struggle? Did he cry out? Or did he trust, not understanding but obeying? Scripture is quiet on this moment, and sometimes silence is the holiest sound. Abraham lifting the blade was lifting more than steel. He was lifting surrender, lifting generations, lifting the weight of a promise ready to lose it because God had spoken. And at the last breath of obedience, mercy thundered. The ram caught in thorns, its horns tangled like a crown. The substitute, the spared son, the spared world. Moriah would not be forgotten. It would become Zion, Jerusalem, the hill where temples would rise and another son would one day walk. But not with wood carried by donkeys, with wood carried on his own back. Isaac lived, but a story was planted that day. A story of provision, of rescue, of covenant that costs. Sarah, we must imagine, never knew the full journey until they returned. Did she cry? Did she embrace Isaac longer than usual? Did she hold her husband and wonder how faith could ask so much? The text doesn't say, but the silence between those lines is full. Isaac walked down that mountain, a boy no more. He was the son of promise, and now the son of deliverance. And the lineage of faith was no longer just a word. It was flesh. It was breath. It was bound in thorns and loosed by love. This is the path we follow. Let's take the next step. Isaac grew old, and the promise did not pass in stories. It passed in blood, in breath, in the trembling of hands laid upon a son. From Abraham to Isaac, from Isaac to Jacob. But the path of blessing is never smooth. It winds through rivalry, through deception, through wrestling. And Jacob, the one who grasped his brother's heel, became the one who grasped after heaven. Esau was born first. But Jacob took the birthright, not by force, by stew, not by worth, by hunger. And later the blessing, a goat, a garment, a blind father. And suddenly Jacob stood in place of another. Was he chosen, or did he steal? The answer is yes and no. Because God's grace is not clean. It is costly. It is wild. It chooses not by perfection, but by purpose. Jacob fled. Esau vowed revenge. And for years Jacob wandered. But God followed, not with wrath, with wrestling. One night Jacob was left alone, and a man, or was it more than a man, came. They fought, through the dust, through the dark, until dawn. And Jacob would not let go. I will not release you unless you bless me. He walked away limping. He walked away renamed Israel, the one who struggles with God. This is where the nation begins, not with strength, but with surrender, not with armies, but with a limp. And when Jacob returned, Esau embraced him. Because sometimes what we fear has already been healed. But the story turns again. Jacob had 12 sons, but he loved one more. Joseph, the dreamer, the favored, the one with a coat of many colors. And the brothers, tired of dreams, tired of love, they never received, stripped him, sold him, lied. Your son is dead, they told Jacob. But Joseph was not dead. He was planted, in chains, in a pit, in a prison. But always God was with him. Dreams guided him still, not his own, but others. And in time the prisoner became prince, Pharaoh's right hand, ruler of plenty. And famine came, and brothers came, not for Joseph, for grain. They did not recognize him, but he knew them. And instead of revenge, he gave them mercy. Because time had turned his wounds into wisdom. I am your brother, he said. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. And so the sons of Israel came to Egypt, welcomed, protected, and there they grew. From a family to a nation, but not yet free. Because every promise must walk through pain, and Egypt would not remain a refuge. It would become a chain, but that is the next story. And here the first great movement ends. From Eden to Egypt, from garden to grain, from one man's faith to a people's beginning. And the God who walked in the garden now waits in Egypt for another deliverer, another voice in the wilderness, another promise rising. But before we go there, let's pause. You've just journeyed through the ancient waters of memory and covenant. From Cain's exile to Abraham's altar. From Isaac's laughter to Joseph's dreams. These are not just stories. They are mirrors, reflections of our own exile and our own calling. If this journey stirred something in you, a question, a tear, a moment of awe, then, like this video, share it with someone who's walking through their own wilderness. And if you want to continue with us from Egypt to Sinai, from slavery to promise, then subscribe. Comment below what part struck your soul the deepest, because stories are meant to be shared. And this is just the beginning. Joseph forgave. But forgiveness does not erase the ache. When Jacob learned his son was alive, the years fell from his face. And when they met again, father and son, it was more than reunion. It was resurrection. Now I can die in peace, Jacob whispered. But before he died, he blessed each son, each name, each future spoken with trembling lips. To Judah he gave the lion, to Joseph the fruit. And when he was buried, it was not in Egypt. It was in Canaan, because even in death he pointed home. Joseph stayed, but he never forgot. When his time came, he said, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones from here. Because even in promise we wait, even in blessing we long. And Joseph died, not as a prince, as a seed, planted in a foreign land, waiting. And so ends Genesis. Not with a king, with a coffin, a box of bones testifying that God is not done. The Bible is not a book of answers. It is a book of echoes. Cain's cry, Noah's hammer, Abraham's knife, Jacob's limp, Joseph's chains, each sound a whisper of a greater story, a coming Savior, a truer Son, a final sacrifice. And so we wait, but we do not wait alone. We wait together. Thank you for walking with us through soil and sorrow, covenant and calling. We're just getting started, so take a moment, reflect, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to remember that even in silence, God sees. Even in exile, He speaks. And even in bones, He breathes life. This is verse and wisdom. This is your story too. The bones of Joseph lay still, but the people multiplied. What began as refuge became routine, then fear, then chains. A new king arose in Egypt, one who knew not Joseph, one who saw the Hebrews not as guests but as threat. They were too many, too strong, too blessed, and so blessing became burden. The cries of childbirth turned to the cries of labor, brick after brick, city after city, built by hands that once held sheep. now calloused by straw and sweat. Still they grew. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. It made no sense. And so Pharaoh took a darker path. He summoned the midwives, gave them a command. When you see a Hebrew boy born, kill him. But the women feared God and spared the sons. So Pharaoh turned to the people, cast every Hebrew son into the Nile. And Egypt, the land that once opened arms, now opened rivers. Can you hear the silence? The quiet before the first cry that didn't return. Can you see the baskets floating where cradles should have been? This was no longer the land of Joseph. This was the land of forgetting. But heaven did not forget. Every whisper, every tear, every silent scream heard. Because bondage does not drown out covenant. And God remembered. He always does. This is how Exodus begins. Not with miracles, with mourning, not with plagues, with pain. But the deeper the sorrow, the nearer the rescue. Let us listen for the next voice. The Nile flowed like judgment, but somewhere in its currents floated hope. One mother could not let go. She hid her son for 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she made an ark. Small, covered in pitch like Noah's long ago. She placed the child inside and placed the ark among the reeds. Not abandoned, entrusted, and the river carried him to Pharaoh's own house, to the daughter of the very man who ordered his death. And she opened the basket. She saw the child. She heard his cry, and she was moved. This is how deliverance begins. Not with swords, with sympathy, not with fire, with tears. The boy would be called Moses, because he was drawn out of water, out of danger, out of the silence. He would grow in the palace, but he would never forget the people of the pit. And one day he would return, not as prince, as prophet, but that day is not yet. For now the people wait, the cries rise, the groans multiply, and heaven listens, because God is never far, especially when it feels like he is. This is the tension before the rescue, the silence before the voice, the wait before the wind. And when he speaks, everything will change. Let us prepare to hear him. Moses grew, but identity is not inherited. It is forged. He wore Egyptian linen, ate Egyptian food, spoke Egyptian tongues, but his heart beat Hebrew, and one day it broke. He saw a taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave, and something ancient rose in him. Rage, justice, judgment. He struck, and the Egyptian fell, buried in sand, buried in silence. But truth never stays buried. The next day Moses saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He tried to stop them, but one turned and asked, "Who made you a ruler over us? Will you kill me too?" The word struck deeper than the blow he had delivered. He was not accepted by Egypt, nor embraced by Israel. He was alone, so he fled into the wilderness, into the space between judgment and calling. 40 years, gone, forgotten, but not by God. In Midian, he learned a new name: shepherd, husband, father. He led sheep through the quiet. He learned patience, but inside him something still burned. And one day, as he led the flock beyond the wilderness, he saw it. A bush, burning but not consumed. And from the flame a voice, "Moses." He turned and answered the ancient word, "Here I am." The fire did not spread. The leaves did not blacken. The bush was aflame yet alive. Moses drew near, barefoot, breath caught hot, trembling. And the voice said, "Take off your sandals, for the ground you stand on is holy." It was the first holy ground since Eden, not because of the soil, because of the presence. God spoke again. "I have seen the affliction of my people. I have heard their cry. I know their sorrows." 3 verbs: seen, heard, known. This is the God who dwells in suffering. And then the call: "I will send you to Pharaoh. You Moses, the man who ran, the man who stuttered, the man who said, "Who am I?" But calling is never about ability. It is about availability. God replied, "I will be with you." And Moses asked the name, because names meant everything. And God said, "I am who I am. Tell them I am has sent me." This was no title. It was essence, being itself, timeless, unburned, unbroken. The fire in the bush was the voice in the name. And Moses fell. He argued. He trembled. He asked for help. And God gave him Aaron, but the path was now set. Egypt would tremble. The staff would rise. The river would bleed. The name would be known. Let us walk with him. Moses returned, not as a prince, not as a fugitive, as a prophet. He walked the halls he once fled, faced the throne he once feared, and beside him, Aaron, his brother, his voice. Together they entered Pharaoh's court. No weapons, no army, just a staff and a word. "Let my people go." Pharaoh laughed. "Who is the Lord that I should obey him?" It was not just a question. It was defiance. And defiance would be answered. Not with arguments, with signs. Aaron cast down the staff. It became a serpent. But Pharaoh's magicians did the same. Still, Aaron's serpent swallowed theirs. A quiet warning. But Pharaoh's heart was stone. He increased the burden, took straw from the people, demanded the same bricks. And the people turned on Moses. "Why have you made us stink before Pharaoh?" Moses cried out, "Why have you sent me?" God replied, "Now you will see what I will do. Because every promise must pass through resistance, and every deliverer must pass through doubt. Let us enter the signs and wonders." This was not how Moses expected it to go. He had spoken the name, performed the sign, and yet Pharaoh mocked. The people suffered more, and Moses doubted, but God did not rebuke him. He reminded him, "I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I established my covenant. I will bring you out. I will redeem you. I will take you as my people. I will be your God." 6 promises, like steps out of bondage. But still the people would not listen. Their spirits were broken by cruel slavery. So God spoke again, "Go to Pharaoh." But Moses hesitated. "I am of uncircumcised lips." Still he went, this time not with persuasion, with power. The first plague struck. Water turned to blood. The Nile lifeblood of Egypt became death. Fish died. The river stank. The people could not drink, but Pharaoh's heart was firm. So came frogs, then gnats, then flies, each sign a blow. Not just to Egypt, to its gods, to its idols, to its pride. And yet Pharaoh's heart hardened. Every time Moses returned, the word was the same. "Let my people go." And each time, Pharaoh refused. But something was building, not just judgment, revelation. God was revealing himself to Egypt, to Israel, to Moses, not just as deliverer, as I am. The battle was no longer Moses versus Pharaoh. It was heaven versus empire, creator versus tyrant. Let us step deeper into the clash of gods. Darkness gathered, but the light of deliverance flickered just beneath the surface. Plague after plague had struck Egypt, and yet Pharaoh's heart remained iron. Blood had flowed, frogs had leapt, dust had turned to gnats, flies swarmed, livestock died, boils broke upon skin, hail fell like fire, locusts devoured the last green, and then darkness, a darkness that could be felt. 3 days. Still Pharaoh would not yield. This was not just a battle of power, it was a war of gods. Each plague a blow to Egypt's idols. The Nile, the sun, the cattle, the crops. But the final blow would fall upon life itself. God spoke to Moses. "One more plague I will bring upon Pharaoh and Egypt. Afterward, he will let you go. This time it would not strike the land. It would strike the home. Every firstborn in Egypt would die. From Pharaoh's throne to the prisoner's cell, even the animals. But Israel would be covered, not by might, not by merit, by blood. A lamb, unblemished, slain, its blood spread on doorposts. A sign, a shield, not to keep death away, but to invite mercy in. Each household was told, take a lamb, one per family. Keep it until the 14th day. Then, as twilight fell, they were to kill it, not in haste, in reverence. They were to take the blood and mark it, top of the door, both sides, a frame in blood. And inside they were to eat, roasted lamb, bitter herbs, unleavened bread, their sandals on, their staffs in hand, ready, because when God passed through, he would see the blood and pass over, not because they deserved it, because they trusted, because they obeyed. And that night it came, a wind no one could see, a silence that screamed. In every Egyptian home a cry, a sun still, a breath stolen. Death walked but skipped over every door with blood. Judgment fell, but grace stood watch. This was no magic, it was memory. Because every year from then on, Israel would remember. The lamb, the blood, the mercy, the meal. This was the beginning of months. The beginning of freedom, not just from Pharaoh, from fear, from slavery to sonship. And still today that blood speaks, not just on wood, on hearts, on souls. Let us walk out into the dawn of freedom. Midnight. A cry rose in Egypt like thunder. Every house touched, every family broken. From the throne to the stable there was no escape. And Pharaoh, the god-king of the Nile, bowed beneath the weight of loss. He called for Moses. In the night, go, he said. Take your people, take your flocks, go. But hurry, and bless me also. The man who once defied God now begged. And so Israel moved, not in fear, in haste. They took their bread, no time for leaven. They took silver and gold, given freely by their captors. They took bones, Joseph's promise, carried into freedom. 600,000 men plus women and children, a multitude. From slaves to pilgrims, the long night gave way to dawn. And the people sang, this is the Lord's Passover. By strength of hand, the Lord has brought us out. They did not leave as fugitives. They marched as a people claimed, redeemed. But Pharaoh changed his mind. Let us follow him. Through the darkness, torches flickered. Children clung to mothers. Old men wept not from fear, but from awe. For the first time in 400 years, the chains were gone. Freedom did not feel like thunder. It felt like walking. One step, then another. A column of people stretching across the horizon. No maps, no roads, only promise. They carried what they could. Cloth, bread, hope, and in the middle of it all, bone. Joseph's bones, wrapped and guarded. Because even in freedom, they remembered. The bread was flat, no yeast. It was a sign of haste, of obedience, of leaving behind the old life forever. And behind them, Egypt grieved. Their gods had failed. Their king was broken, their future shaken. But Israel was not looking back. A pillar of cloud rose before them. By day a guide, by night a flame. They walked, they watched, they waited. And Pharaoh, waking from sorrow, hardened again. What have we done? He asked. We've let them go. So he gathered his army, chariots, horses, spearmen, and thunder rose again. Not from grief, from war. The desert would not be quiet for long. Let us press forward to the edge of the sea. The sea was before them. The army was behind them. And fear was within them. They cried out to Moses, to God. Were there no graves in Egypt, Why did you bring us here to die?" So quickly hope turned to horror, and Moses stood still. He heard them, but he also heard God. "Why do you cry to me?" the voice said. "Tell the people to go forward. Lift your staff, stretch out your hand, and divide the sea." Then the cloud that led them moved behind them, between Egypt and Israel, a wall of shadow, a shield of fire. And Moses raised his staff. The wind rose, and the sea split, not with a ripple, with a roar, walls of water, a dry path, through chaos away. And the people walked, not fast, in awe, between towers of the deep, each step a miracle. And Pharaoh pursued. His chariots thundered, his men followed into the gap. But when Israel reached the other side, God spoke again. "Stretch out your hand." And Moses obeyed. The waters collapsed, not slowly. Suddenly, chariots sank, horses vanished, screams rose, then were silenced, and the sea returned to stillness. Not one soldier remained. The might of Egypt drowned in the very path Israel walked, and the people stood, dry, shaken, saved. They turned and looked back. Nothing followed them, only waves, only memory, and then a song from Miriam, the prophetess, the sister. With tambourine in hand, she sang, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea." Others joined, first a few, then a multitude, a chorus on the shore. Not just a song of victory, a song of identity. They were no longer slaves. They were witnesses of power, of mercy, of a path through the impossible. And Moses stood among them. He had doubted, he had feared, but he had followed. And now they followed him into the wilderness, not to wander, to worship. But first, the desert must test them. Let us journey into the silence between miracles. The song faded. The tambourines were quiet, but the desert was loud, not in sound, in silence. 3 days without water, 3 days under sun, and the people murmured. "What shall we drink?" Moses cried out. And God showed him a tree. He cast it into bitter water, and it turned sweet. They drank, but they did not trust, because thirst returns, and so does fear. Next came hunger. The people looked back not at Egypt's chains, at its food. "We remember the leeks, the onions, the meat. You brought us here to die." And heaven opened, not with wrath, with bread. In the morning, dew flakes, white, thin. They did not know what it was, so they called it manna, which means, "What is it?" It tasted like honey, like seed, like memory. They were told to gather only enough for the day, except before Sabbath. No more, no less. Some tried to hoard. It rotted, because obedience is learned slowly. They ate and were filled, but not all were grateful. Let us follow the next hunger. Some gathered more, some gathered less, but every household had enough. And every morning the dew returned. It was not just bread. It was discipline. It was dependence. Each bite whispered, "I provide." Then came Sabbath, the first rest in freedom. They gathered double the day before, and it did not rot. A quiet miracle. Even rest was sacred. But thirst returned. Again, the people quarreled. They said, "Give us water that we may drink." They tested God, and Moses cried, "What shall I do with them?" God answered, "Take your staff, strike the rock." And he did. From stone flowed water. Clear, cool, enough. They called the place Massah and Meribah, because there they tested the Lord. And yet he provided bread from heaven, water from stone, rest in the desert. The wilderness was not empty. It was a classroom, and God was teaching them how to live, not by bread alone, but by every word that comes from his mouth. Let us follow as they learn again and again. The desert did not only test the body, it tested the spirit. Enemies saw them, tired, disoriented, unarmed. Amalek came, not for conquest, for cruelty. They struck the weak, the stragglers, those in the back. And Moses said to Joshua, "Choose men, go out, fight." Joshua obeyed. But this would not be a battle of swords alone. Moses climbed a hill. With him Aaron and Hur. He lifted his staff. And as long as his hands were raised, Israel prevailed. But when he lowered them, Amalek gained ground. So Aaron and Hur held his arms, one on each side, steady, until sunset. And Amalek was defeated, not just by force, by faith. Because sometimes the greatest battles are won not on the field, but on the hill, in the unseen. Let us climb with them. The battlefield stretched wide. Joshua led the charge. Dust rose. Swords clashed. Cries rang out. But the real war was above. On the hill, Moses' arms trembled, not from age, from burden. Because this was not just a fight for safety. It was a fight for destiny, and he could not do it alone. So Aaron stood on one side, Hur on the other. They placed a stone for Moses to sit. They held up his hands, hour after hour, until the sun dipped low, and Israel prevailed. Not by numbers, not by strategy, but by unity, by prayer, by faith. When the battle ended, God spoke again. Write this as a memorial. Recite it in the ears of Joshua, because some victories must be remembered, not just celebrated. So Moses built an altar. He called it Yahweh Nissi. The Lord is my banner. Because in every battle we must know who we march under. And that banner is not a flag. It is a name. Let us carry it into the next trial. After the sword came the counsel. Word spread of Israel's escape of the plagues, the sea, the war. And Jethro, priest of Midian, father-in-law to Moses, came, bringing Zipporah, Moses' wife, bringing Gershom and Eleazar, Moses' sons. Reunion, not with ceremony, with tears. Moses told him everything. The plagues, the Passover, the sea, the manna, the water, the war. And Jethro rejoiced. Now I know the Lord is greater than all gods. Then he brought an offering. A priest from Midian worshipped the God of Israel. And the next day Jethro watched. Moses sat from morning to evening, hearing every case, solving every dispute. And Jethro said, "What you are doing is not good. You will wear yourself out." So he gave him counsel. "Choose wise men. Let them judge the small matters. You judge the great." And Moses listened, because wisdom is not always loud. Sometimes it walks in from the desert and sees what you've missed. The desert was not only hardship, it was also home, at least for a while. Moses welcomed Jethro into the tent. He knelt before him. The man who had once given him shelter, now honored by the one who split the sea. And Jethro, wise and watching, saw what Moses could not. A leader drowning in his people's needs. Each problem brought to one man. Each dispute a stone added to the load. And so he spoke. Delegate. Share the weight. Train others. This is not weakness. This is strength. Because even leaders must rest. Even prophets need partners. And Moses did as Jethro advised. He taught. He appointed. He stepped back not from calling, but from control. And the people began to flourish. Justice flowed faster. Peace settled deeper. Order became sacred. The desert became a place of law, of rhythm, of trust. And so, in a quiet corner of Sinai, one man's counsel changed a nation's course. If you felt the weight of every problem, you are not alone. Even Moses needed Jethro. Share this with someone carrying too much. Comment a time when the right voice shifted your path. Like if you believe God still sends wisdom through unexpected visitors. Let us ascend the mountain together, where the voice of God will thunder next. Let us ascend the mountain together, where the voice of God will thunder next. But what does it mean for a nation to stand face to face with the divine, when the sky quakes, when the earth trembles, when the voice of the Almighty speaks not just to a man, but to a people? Let us draw near to the mountain that burns without fire. The mountain loomed, Sinai, barren, still, until the day God called Moses upward. Tell the people, he said, if they obey my voice and keep my covenant, they shall be my treasured possession, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. And Moses returned. He told the people, and they said with one voice, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. But before the covenant could be given, the people had to be prepared. 3 days, to wash, to wait, to keep away from the mountain. Even a foot would mean death. Not because God was cruel, because he was holy. And then the third morning, thunder, lightning, a thick cloud, the blast of a trumpet, growing louder. The mountain shook. The people trembled. Moses led them near, but not too near, because fire descended. Smoke billowed like a furnace. The ground itself throbbed. And then a voice. Not Moses, not Aaron, God himself. He spoke not to one man, but to an entire nation. 10 words, 10 commands. Simple, terrifying. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet. No scroll, no whispers, only fire and a voice. And the people backed away. Let God not speak to us again, they cried. Let Moses speak, we will listen. Because they had seen what no other nation had seen, heard what no other ear had heard. Not a myth, not a metaphor, but a holy encounter. And yet even fire fades, even awe settles, even covenant needs to be written. So God called Moses higher, into the thick darkness, where lightning lit no path. And there he wrote with his own finger, stone tablets, law, covenant, guidance. And below, the people waited, for days, then weeks, and fear began to twist into forgetfulness. What will they do when God delays? Let us descend again and see. They had waited for centuries to be free, and now they stood still, not as slaves, as witnesses. The smoke coiled like a crown around the mountain's peak, and with every clap of thunder they remembered. This was not a story. This was the voice, and each command struck like a drumbeat in the soul. No idols, no lies, no theft, no blood, no betrayal, no forgetting, no gods but me. They were not suggestions. They were not burdens. They were a mirror, a path, a doorway into covenant. The people shook not just from fear, from recognition. This God was not like Egypt's gods. He did not hide. He did not flatter. He did not bend. He revealed. And when the final word fell like fire, the people stepped back. Moses stepped forward. He climbed again, not with pride, with trembling, into the cloud that burned without flame. He was gone 40 days, and in that waiting, something began to unravel. The people wondered. They whispered. They feared. Had Moses died? Had God forgotten? They gathered gold. They built fire. They formed a calf, a shape from Egypt, a god they could see. And they bowed. They sang. They forgot. But not for long, because at the summit, God saw, and his anger burned. Go down, he said to Moses. Your people have corrupted themselves. And Moses descended, with tablets in hand, stone written by the hand of heaven, only to see fire below, laughter, dancing, idolatry, and his heart broke. The tablets shattered, the covenant torn, the promise fractured, but grace was not gone. He stood among them, the fire still in his eyes, the dust of the mountain still clinging to his robe, and before him a fire of another kind, dancing, idols, a song with no holiness. It pierced him. They had seen the sea part. They had tasted bread from heaven. They had heard the voice. And still they forgot. Still they returned to Egypt, if not in feet, then in heart. Moses took the calf. He burned it. He ground it to powder. He scattered it on water and made them drink a bitter cup. Then he turned to Aaron. What did these people do to you that you led them into such sin? Aaron trembled. They gave me gold, he said. I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. But Moses knew better. Idolatry is never accidental. It is shaped, fed, chosen, and God was not silent. A plague came upon them, a reckoning, but also a chance. Moses returned to the mountain, this time not to receive, but to plead, to forgive them, or blot me out of your book. Such was the heart of a shepherd. And God responded. He would send his angel. He would still lead them, but his presence would not go. And Moses cried, if you do not go with us, do not send us. Let us be marked by you or not at all. And again God relented. He is just, but he is merciful. And he called Moses once more, to carve new tablets, to climb again, to meet again, to renew the covenant. Because though fire falls, grace remains. Let us follow Moses into the cleft of the rock where glory passes by. Moses climbed again, alone, but not forgotten. He carried no tablets, only grief, only hope. The mountain greeted him with silence, but then a voice, not thunder, not wrath, a whisper, come near. And the Lord descended, not in fury, in cloud, in glory. He passed before Moses and said, the Lord, a God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty. This was not a contradiction. It was covenant, justice with mercy, truth with tenderness. And Moses fell to the ground. He worshipped. He begged, let the Lord go with us. Pardon our iniquity. Take us as your inheritance. And God said yes. Again, he renewed the covenant. He gave new commandments. He called for obedience, and Moses was changed. He stayed 40 days and nights. No bread, no water, only presence, only words. When he came down, his face shone, radiant, terrifying. The people backed away, because glory leaves a mark. And Moses covered his face with a veil, until he went to speak with God again. This was not the same Moses who first stood at the bush. That man trembled. This one interceded. That man said, who am I? This one said, show me your glory. He had seen plagues. He had passed through water. He had heard the voice of fire. But here, in the cleft of the rock, he saw something deeper. Not just the might of God, but the mercy. And when he returned, the second tablets in hand, there was no dancing, no golden calf, only silence. The people looked and looked away, because his face glowed. With reflected fire, with echoing light, they dared not draw near. So Moses veiled his face, not to hide, to protect. He spoke the laws again, this time not on shattered ground, but to listening hearts. He told them of festivals, of rest, of justice, of worship, of the sanctuary to come. And the people gave. They gave gold, not for idols, but for offering. They brought wood, linen, gems, The women spun thread. The craftsmen shaped ark and altar. From chaos, order. From rebellion, reverence. And in the center of it all, a tent, a place for God to dwell, not above, among. Let us enter that sacred space and watch it rise from obedience and awe. Every beam was measured, every curtain embroidered, every vessel purified. This was not architecture, it was theology made visible. The Ark of the Covenant, wood overlaid with gold. Inside, the tablets. Above, 2 cherubim, wings stretched, faces bowed. A seat not for man, but for mercy. A throne of presence. A table for bread. A lampstand for light. An altar for incense. All surrounded by linen walls and sacred space. Each item a sermon. Each thread a prayer. And finally, the day came. The tabernacle stood. Ready. And Moses blessed it. Then he stepped away. And the cloud descended. Thick, bright, holy. It filled the tent. So much so, not even Moses could enter. Because glory had found a home. The presence that once thundered from Sinai now rested among tents. God had come near. Not for a moment. For a dwelling. And whenever the cloud lifted, they moved. Whenever it settled, they stayed. Because the journey no longer followed the stars. It followed glory. It followed God. And that was enough. Let us walk with them under cloud and fire into the wilderness ahead. And the people followed, step by step, cloud by day, fire by night. But what happens when the cloud stops for too long? When hunger returns? When fear speaks louder than faith? What happens when even after meeting God face to face, we still long for Egypt? Let us walk with them into the shadows of the wilderness where the deepest tests begin. The journey resumed. The tabernacle in the center. 12 tribes in formation. Trumpets sounded. Stand. Move. Camp. Rest. A nation led not by maps, but by presence. And yet complaints returned. It began with craving. The manna. It's the same every day. We remember the fish in Egypt, the melons, the garlic. And the people wept, not because they were hungry, because they were tired of the same miracle. And Moses cried out, "Did I conceive this people? Am I their nurse to carry them in my arms?" He was overwhelmed. He asked for death. But God answered with delegation. 70 elders. The Spirit fell on them, and they prophesied. Not just Moses, others. Because leadership must be shared. But then came another test, even from family. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses. He married a Cushite. Has the Lord only spoken through him? And God called them forward, to the tent, to the cloud. He said, "When I speak with prophets, I use visions, but with Moses face to face." And when the cloud lifted, Miriam's skin was leprous, white, isolated. Aaron begged. Moses prayed. And God healed. After 7 days. Because rebellion, even quiet, has a cost. And healing takes time. But the people were not only hungry for food, they were hungry for variety. For excitement. For something new. They grew bored with the holy. Familiar with the miraculous. And that is a quiet kind of rebellion. So God sent quail. A wind blew from the sea. The camp was covered, and they gathered. They cooked, they ate, but as they chewed, a plague struck. Because the craving came not from need, but from contempt. And the place was named Kibroth Hatava, the graves of craving. Because their hunger buried them. Still the journey pressed on. And as the miles wore on, so did the pressure on Moses. He no longer asked, "What now?" He asked, "Why me?" So God took the Spirit from Moses and gave it to 70 others. And they prophesied, not forever, but once, to show that the burden of leadership was meant to be shared. And 2 men, Eldad and Medad, prophesied outside the tent. Joshua protested, but Moses smiled. Would that all the Lord's people were prophets. Because true leaders do not hoard glory. They multiply it. Still dissent rose from within. Miriam, the sister who once watched over him in the Nile, now watched him with jealousy. Aaron, who stood beside him in Egypt, now whispered against him. But God heard. He descended, and he defended his servant. Moses was faithful in all his house. Moses spoke with God as a friend. And when God left, Miriam's skin turned white. Not with favor, with leprosy. She stood outside the camp, alone, exposed, ashamed. And Moses, the one she accused, interceded. He cried out, "O God, heal her, please." And after 7 days she returned, not because of merit, because of mercy, because grace still travels with the camp. Let us now come to the border where giants dwell and fear will shout louder than faith. If this journey of wilderness speaks to your own, tell us what moment made you pause. Like and subscribe, not just to follow stories, but to walk with truth. They stood at the edge. The promise was in sight. The land flowed with milk and honey. They had made it, almost. And the people came to Moses with a request. Let us send men to spy the land. Not because they doubted the land, but because they doubted themselves. 12 were chosen, one from each tribe. Leaders, warriors, witnesses. For 40 days they searched. They climbed hills. They walked valleys. They tasted figs and grapes so large they had to be carried on poles. The land was good. But the people, giants, fortified cities, sons of Enoch, they returned with fruit and fear. And the report spread like smoke. All the people are of great height. We are grasshoppers in their sight. The people cried out. They wept all night. And then rebellion again. Let us choose a new leader. Let us return to Egypt. Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes. They stood before the crowd. The land is good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will give it to us. Do not fear them. But the people picked up stones to kill them. And then glory descended. God came, and he said to Moses, "How long will they despise me? How long will they refuse to believe? I will strike them and start over with you." But Moses stood in the gap. Again, what will Egypt say? They will think you could not finish what you began. Forgive, I pray you. And God forgave. But the consequence remained. Everyone over 20 who had grumbled would not enter the land. They would wander. 1 year for every day the spies searched. 40 years, a whole generation buried in the sand. Except 2, Joshua and Caleb. Because faith is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear lead. And so they turned back, away from promise, into wilderness. Not because God changed, because they would not. The journey began again. Sometimes the greatest tragedy is not defeat, it is delay. Let us walk alongside them through the long silence of regret and the slow lessons of trust. The spies left in the heat of day. They moved quietly. The hills of Hebron, the valleys of Eshcol. Canaan was not a myth. It was beautiful, green, abundant, but also defended. The men of the land were tall, their walls thick. They saw vineyards and villages, but they also saw iron, chariots, and fear began to settle in their bones. They returned after 40 days, with a single cluster of grapes carried between 2 poles. Proof of promise, but their words betrayed their hearts. 10 of them spoke dread. They are stronger than we. We cannot overcome them. And the fear spread, not just among soldiers, among mothers, children, elders. The entire camp one cry, one night of weeping, and by morning, mutiny. Let us go back. Egypt was better. Freedom forgotten. Promise rejected. And Joshua and Caleb, the only 2 who spoke courage, found themselves alone. They reminded the people, this was not about giants. This was about God. If he delighted in them, the land was theirs. But stones were raised, and so was glory. God's voice thundered, but his wrath was met again by Moses' intercession. He did not defend the people. He defended God's name. What will the nations say? You brought them out only to destroy them. Forgive, or your reputation suffers. And God relented. But mercy does not erase consequence. The verdict fell like thunder. Not one of this generation will see the land, except Caleb and Joshua, because they had a different spirit. They followed fully. And so the direction changed. Back to the wilderness. Back into waiting. They had seen the edge of promise, but would die in the dust. Because sometimes the greatest enemy is not the giant ahead, but the fear within. And when fear governs, faith fades. And the road lengthens. And the years are spent, not in pursuit, but in circles. Let us now enter that long circle where God still speaks even in delay. Some promises bloom slowly. Some roads take longer because our hearts need reshaping. If you're walking in circles, you're not alone. Keep listening. The desert stretched endlessly. Sand, stone, sky, and silence, but not absence. Because God still moved with them. Cloud by day, fire by night, guiding, watching. And though the direction bent away from promise, his presence remained. Still the people forgot. Again, rebellion did not vanish in exile. It merely changed form. Korah, a Levite, with Dathan and Abiram, they gathered 250 leaders, respected men, and they stood against Moses and Aaron. You take too much on yourselves, they said. Are we not all holy? And Moses fell on his face. He knew this was not about equality. It was about ambition, pride dressed as piety. The next day the ground opened. It swallowed them whole. Fire consumed the rebels, and silence returned. But even that did not end it. The people blamed Moses, blamed Aaron. So a plague began, again. And Aaron the accused stood with a censer, between the dead and the living, interceding, smoke rising. Judgment halted, because even in opposition mercy stood in the gap. And still the journey continued. Slow, circular, marked by funerals more than feasts, until at last Miriam died. The sister who watched over the basket in the Nile, gone. And the people still complained, no water. Why did you bring us here? So Moses and Aaron came before God. And God said, speak to the rock. But Moses struck it, twice, and water flowed. But so did consequence. You did not sanctify me before the people. You shall not enter the land. Even Moses, even Aaron, because leadership is not above obedience. And when leaders lose patience, they may lose promise. Let us pause here where grace and grief meet and remember. Holiness matters even in the wilderness. Miriam's death was more than a burial. It was a breaking. She was the song at the sea, the prophetess of victory. Now gone. And Moses felt it, a void, an ache. And just as grief arrived, so did complaint. No water. Again, always again. And Moses, tired in soul, came before God. God's words were simple. Speak to the rock. But Moses struck it. Not once. Twice. Was it anger? Fatigue? Despair? The water came, but so did silence. And then the word. You will not lead them into the land. And for Moses it was a quiet end to a long obedience. Not denied love, just consequence. Leadership does not shield. It reveals. And Aaron too would not enter. They climbed Mount Hor. There, Aaron removed his garments, passed them to Eleazar, and died. No fire, no plague, only breath leaving. The people mourned 30 days. Because even flawed leaders can be deeply loved. Back in the camp, the people moved on, but rebellion returned. Korah's challenge had not ended with the earth's mouth. God gave a sign. 12 staffs, one from each tribe, laid before the ark. And the next day, Aaron's staff had budded, blossomed, bore almonds, life from wood. A priest confirmed, not by vote, by resurrection. Still they feared, will we all die? But God made a way, offerings, atonement, holiness, not as threat, but as invitation. Let us now follow them further into the sand, where serpents slither and salvation takes a strange form. When leaders stumble, the people still journey, and sometimes grace flows from the same rock we strike. The end was near, but it did not come quickly. The wilderness still had lessons, and fire still had forms. The people traveled. They met resistance. Kings and nations rose to block them, but victory came. First Arad, then Sihon, then Og. 3 kings, 3 battles, and for the first time the people won, not by accident, by faith, by obedience. But between these battles, a serpent. Again the people complained. No food, no water. This manna is worthless. And so the serpents came, fiery, deadly. They bit, they killed. And the people cried out, "We have sinned. Pray for us." And Moses prayed, and God said something strange. "Make a serpent, lift it on a pole. Whoever looks shall live." So Moses crafted bronze. He raised it high, and those who looked were healed, not by magic, by faith, by obedience. Because sometimes salvation comes in strange shapes. A serpent, once a symbol of death, now a sign of life. Because grace meets us where we fall and lifts us where we trust. The land began to shift, from endless sand to borders, from wandering to waiting. They passed through Edom, but not without refusal. Then to Arad, a king who struck first. He captured prisoners, but Israel vowed, "If you give him into our hand, we will destroy his cities." And God did. Then came Sihon, king of the Amorites. He refused passage. He came out with sword, but Israel struck him down, took his cities, dwelt in them. Then a giant, a bed of iron, but not enough to stop the people of promise. They conquered him, and suddenly the land on the east of Jordan was theirs. Not yet Canaan, but a taste, a preview, and still between triumphs, a complaint, a venom. The fiery serpents came not just to bite, but to wake, because the people had again cursed the very provision that sustained them. And when they looked for healing, it did not come from antidote. It came from above, a pole, a serpent of bronze, lifted high, and those who looked lived. It was not logical, it was faithful, because healing often requires humility, and grace often appears in forms we do not expect. Even Jesus generations later would say, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes shall not perish." The bronze serpent, a shadow. Christ, the fulfillment. Let us now ascend with Moses toward his final mountain to glimpse the land and say goodbye. Some promises we only see from a distance, but even from afar they shine. The sun rose over Moab. The river shimmered, and across the waters Canaan waited. But Moses would not cross. He had led them for 40 years. Through fire, through famine, through rebellion and restoration. Now it was time to let go. He gathered the tribes, one by one. He blessed them, not with riches, with prophecy, with hope. Then he turned to Joshua. "Be strong, be courageous. You will lead them." And the mantle passed. But one journey remained, not for Israel, for Moses. God called him up Mount Nebo, a quiet ascent, step by step, memory by memory. He looked across the land, from Gilead to Dan, from Naphtali to Ephraim, from Judah to the western sea. He saw Jericho. He saw the hills. He saw the promise. And the Lord said, "This is the land I swore. I have let you see it, but you shall not cross." And there, on the mountain, he died. Not in fear, not in defeat, in vision, in presence. The Lord himself buried him, and to this day, no one knows where. Because some graves are not for monuments, they are for mysteries. Israel mourned 30 days, and then they moved, led by Joshua, but never forgetting Moses, the man who spoke with God face to face, the man whose staff split seas, whose voice pleaded for mercy, whose heart broke for a people he did not choose, yet loved to the end. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there, not in failure, in fullness. He climbed one last mountain, not to lead, to see, to behold the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And though his feet would never press its soil, his eyes saw it all, and that was enough. God buried him in a valley no one would find, because some stories are meant to end in mystery, so that the glory belongs not to man but to God. No prophet rose like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. But now the mantle passes. Joshua rises. The people prepare. The river waits. And so does the promise. The wilderness is over, but the story is not. If this journey stirred something in you, share it. Like if Moses' life made you reflect. Subscribe to walk with us through the stories that still speak. Share this with someone who stands like Moses looking into the distance. Thank you for traveling with us through silence, flame, serpent, and storm. You've walked not just through scripture, but through soul. May you see your own promises even from afar. And when the cloud lifts, may you have the courage to follow. Until then, may peace go before you, and the presence never leave your side. God bless you.